Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. This is Ram Media and I'm Morgan Lopez. Today we're going to be discussing personality traits in detail due to popular request. People that watched my previous one, Personality and Aid to Understanding, it was a brief overview of the big 5 personality traits. Brief, well, almost 2 hours, but brief compared to what could be said. And what I'm going to do, this is episode 1 of a 5-part series, where I'm going to go through each personality trait in a lot more detail to try and flesh out and sort of help us understand a little bit more how this affects us in our all different aspects of life and between people and so on and so forth. So I'm doing this alphabetically in alphabetical order. So today I'm starting with agreeableness. If this intrigues you, stay tuned. Cool. So, agreeableness, what is it? And how does it affect us? Okay. So, agreeableness is, it's actually quite self-explanatory because this was all taken from the language, traits that are coded in general human speech. So, agreeableness is exactly what it says. If you are high in agreeableness, you're agreeable. You tend to agree with people a lot, and you can actually... it's possible to be so agreeable that you can even do yourself in. So you're at a negotiating table, for example, and the person's like, I want X, Y, and Z, and you are more inclined to agree with the other person's demands, even if it means that you end up losing out. So this can be an advantage and a disadvantage depending on what aspect of life that you are trying to engage in. Now, it's important to note that this trait, more than any other trait, is where men and women differ the most, except for one trait, which is the difference between men and women's interests. So men have a greater interest in things, whereas women have a greater interest in people. And agreeableness is one of the things that really brings it out. So to understand the ratio, for example, and so we need to get something clear. It's not that men can't be agreeable, and it's not that women can't be disagreeable. They can both, but on average, women are more agreeable than men. So, for example, to get an idea of the ratio, if you had to go out and randomly off the street choose men and women, right? So you get someone's walking past, you grab a man, and then you grab a woman. And someone says to you, place a bet on who is the most agreeable person. The safe money would be on the woman, to say that that of the two, she's the most agreeable. And if you did that, just always choosing the woman, you would win 60% of the time. So that is the spread, so to speak. But it's not actually that massive. So it's a 40-60 ratio. And like I said, you do get men who can be very agreeable, and then you also get women who can be very disagreeable. But on average, the most agreeable person in any society will almost certainly be a woman, and the most disagreeable person in any given society will almost certainly be a man. All right, so that is where we sort of stand with that. And if you want to describe agreeableness in general, if the term on its own is not enough, so agreeableness is associated with words like being trusting. So agreeable people are very trusting. They want to trust. They want to believe the best of other people. They can be very moral in the sense, it's not the only trait that. So each trait has its own moral idiosyncrasies. So, for example, someone who's very agreeable will have certain morals, like they won't really want to lie about other people because it might hurt them, and so on and so forth. They're very careful to not hurt other people's feelings. They're very compassionate. And they're very altruistic, so they will give of themselves even if they receive nothing in return. People who are high in in agreeableness are very other person minded. So they're always thinking about other people. And like I said earlier on, to the point where it can be a detriment to themselves, where if you're high in agreeableness and you don't learn to manage that, you can find yourself in a point in life where you know everything about other people, but you have no idea who you are, your own self. And that's why you often see, like specifically in what they call chick flicks, right? Movies that are geared towards women usually have some sort of voyage of self-discovery in it somewhere along the line, finding out who am I really, and I'm going out in the world to try and find myself. And the reason for that is because women are always tend to be, not women only, of course, but anyone who's high in agreeableness, which tends to be women more often than not, they're so other person focused that they never really take the time to figure out what it is they want and what they like and dislike and so on and so forth. And it's why it's the never-ending battle between men and women can be like, well, sweetie, what would you like for dinner? I don't know. What would you like? And there's a fight, right? Or invariably ends up in a fight while you're trying to figure out, well, what on earth do you want to eat? And so that's a sort of issue you get. People high in agreeableness they like to cooperate with others, so they're team players. They can be very modest. The modesty tends to be a big thing. They will underplay their virtues, and whilst uplifting the virtues of other people. And like I said, compassion, sympathy for others. And here's one of those interesting things. You often get people will say, if they've gone through a terrible experience, they'll say, well, you couldn't possibly understand because you've never been through it. When it comes to people who are high in agreeableness, that's actually not true. A person who's very, very high in agreeableness can run the abstractions in their mind to such a degree that they can actually feel they can literally feel what you're feeling. And that's true. That's true empathy. My wife, for example, is very, 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 very high in agreeableness and very, very, very high in compassion. And she just, it's like that womanly instinct, so to speak, that sixth sense, where she can just look at someone. It's like, I know exactly what they're feeling. And a lot of people, even other women, have often been taken aback. Well, she'll go up to someone. She's like, I can see you need a hug, and we'll give them a hug. And they'll be like, how did you know? Right? They're totally taken aback. It's like, I so needed that, but I didn't even know I needed that. Right? And that's what very, very high agreeableness is. Character agreeableness is. So very, very good in that particular sense. So some considerations. So I'm going to go through description, considerations, and social effects, how it affects you in work and how it affects you in your relationships. Now, some interesting considerations, because like I said, there's a disparity in agreeableness between men and women. So men tend to be disagreeable, right? Now, here's the interesting thing and I'm going to put, if in the video description, I'm going to put links to the studies that I'm referring to. They ran an experiment where they took people, right, and they exposed them to signs of aggression, right? So someone that has an angry face or positions themselves in a physically aggressive way, and they tested the people's response to this aggression stimulus, right? And what they found was that the higher people were in agreeableness, the less they reacted to aggression stimuli with an aggression response. Okay? So again, this gives us insight why if you go to a guy and you're aggressive, he's more likely than not to actually respond also equally in an aggressive manner, whereas women, women generally tend to not do that and will try more to negotiate and be friendly and all these sorts of things. And it's the same thing with men with high in agreeableness. So men who are high in agreeableness, they have the exact same response. They rather than respond in an aggressive manner, they'll tend to try and mediate. Let me buy you a beer. Let's have a chat about it. And almost try to be friends with you, right? Understand, well, why are you being aggressive towards me, and so on and so forth. So that's one of those interesting things. So when we're looking at the difference at why men on average tend to behave the way they are, why is their first response always aggression? One of the things to consider is that, so agreeableness, we have various circuits in our brain, and this circuit deals with a specific thing, and the other circuit deals with a specific thing. So let's say, for example, you have an aggression circuit in you, and you have a situation, and that aggression circuit activates in order for you to respond aggressively to a particular situation. What it looks like is that trait agreeableness is actually interfering with that circuit. So it's almost like it shuts that circuit down, right? That tendency to be aggressive shuts it down in order for you to then behave in a more agreeable fashion, right? So when we're looking at so for men in general tend to respond more aggressively, and ask, well, why are they like that? It's because on average men are more disagreeable. So it means that how can you say, the biological mechanism to shut off the aggression response is a lot weaker, or depending on how disagreeable they are, is either a lot weaker or is simply not there, right? So when men in general are behaving in an aggressive manner, it's not even necessarily because they just want, not because they want to be that way. It's not even necessarily a conscious thing. It's an automatic biological thing, and it pushes through, because if you're less in agreeableness, you don't have a biological interference from trait agreeableness. And this is why discipline is more important is actually more important for young men than it is necessarily for young women. And you will find that if you have children, or if you're an educator, you'll see that there's this difference between young girls and young boys. Discipline tends to be a lot more necessary with young boys, because young boys are disagreeable, and that will push through a lot more. So it's why things like martial arts and things of that sort, like going to the military and stuff, tends to help young boys and men in general learn through the development of their character that even though they lack the biological restraint on aggression, they can develop the characterological restraint, right? So the body, and I mean, I experience it myself as well, because I'm disagreeable. I'm in the 45th percentile of in the agreeableness trait. So it's 0 to 100. I'm at the 45th percentile, which means I'm disagreeable, and I have to consciously if I'm approached and there's even if I just perceive that there's aggression, my automatic biological physiological response is aggression, and I have to, in my mind, I have to consciously hold myself back and be like, hang on, and rationalize through it and be like, wait, this person might just be expressing themselves wrong, or maybe there's another way around it, rather than to just flip my lid and actually making the situation worse. So these are very, very important considerations. With young boys, I mean with young girls too, but which is why it's very important to know where your children are in the agreeableness trait, because you'll find that those children who are low in agreeableness are going to require a lot more discipline. And when I say discipline, it's not merely just saying no, it's saying no and meaning it. Because if you say no and compromise, you're basically teaching them how to manipulate you, right? So if all I have to do is push through with my disagreeableness, and I'll eventually get what I want, right? So it's of vital importance, and when dealing with that sort of thing. And so discipline, say no and mean it. Or if there is a punishment, for example, the punishment has to be met out. Go sit in your room, I'm going to take away your PlayStation, whatever the case might be. And you don't just do it for 5 minutes. If you say for an hour, or if you say for a week, you make sure you run it to the punishment to its full conclusion, because otherwise they'll learn, right, if I push here, they will eventually give in. And that's what disagreeable people do. They will push until a limit is set, right? And that's why it's so important to discipline. Is again, especially tends to be more young boys, because disagreeable basically will cause you to, I'm going to keep going and get what I want to get, and I'm going to stop only when only once I meet a barrier I can't overcome. Basically, is how we put it. So that's a very, very interesting consideration to bear in mind. Now, so that's your effects socially. Now, here's an interesting thing. This is why men end up in prison more. It's actually quite simple. The strongest predictors of whether an individual is going to end up being criminal, or even not being criminal, so to the most extreme extent, but just being socially very unpleasant, is actually two traits. It's low in agreeableness, so they're disagreeable, and low in conscientiousness, because conscientiousness regulates impulse control. So low impulse control, very disagreeable. They're just, man, they'll wreck society, they'll wreck themselves, they'll wreck others, and which is why that discipline is as a child already, before the age of 4, by the way. If you don't get this right by the age of 4 and socialize your kids properly, specifically disagreeable kids, for the rest of their lives, you're going to be playing damage control, so to speak. So it's extremely, extremely important while they're young. You got to get that, and it's the same with young disagreeable girls as well. So it's not as common, but even disagreeable girls, you got to get in there, both of them. Discipline, and one of the ways that this can be managed, by the way, if you're interested, is if you allow young kids to engage in unstructured rough and tumble play, right? So you see little puppies, like puppies, wolves, lion cubs, creatures of that sort. There's a lot of rough and tumble play. They fall around, they climb on each other, pull each other's ears, pull each other's tails. This is why rough and tumble play is absolutely essential for young children. Absolutely, it's indispensable. Absolutely unstructured play, rough and tumble play. And this is why, ladies, for those of you that are thinking of having children without a man in your life, just forget about it. Forget about it. This is why young boys especially need a male in their lives, a male that they can look up to, a male that can respect, ideally their fathers, right? Novel idea, I know, in this current world, their fathers, because once children reach that age where they're toddlers and they can start moving around and getting into things and stuff like that, that's usually when the father comes in and starts wrestling them around, make like a little wrestling ring and chuck them around and bounce them around and stretch them and pull and extend them, and because that teaches them to be comfortable in their bodies and teaches them the difference between what is gentle touch, what is rough touch, what is too far, what is painful, what is just scary. And you cannot believe how much developmental progress is made from rough and tumble play with young children. And those of you who believe that it shouldn't be done, and you're worried, again, typically women, because a father will go, throw the child 20 meters into the air. The child is, wow, this is absolutely great, and then mom is pulling her hair out because she's just imagining all the things that could go wrong. It's like, let your kids go climb trees and stuff like that. It's better for them to break their legs. And I know this sounds crazy, but it's better for them to break their legs than to not get than to not get the development that they require and then become pathological later on as teenagers and stuff like that, because that's just a downhill trajectory from there. They're gonna be socially awkward. They're not going to be able to make friends. They're gonna become bullies. It's a catastrophe from there on. You can't, and that's what a lot of what we see in society, where schools simply do not cater for that anymore, right? The kids, the playtime recess is brought in. Boys, if they're out playing rugby or whatever and beating each other to pieces, they're not allowed to do that. It's an absolute travesty what's happening in the schools today. We expect specifically young boys, because this is disagreeableness is typically a male trait, where we expect young boys to behave like young girls, and that's just the most stupid thing. You're breeding a criminal is basically what you're doing, right? You have to allow them to go and play and roughhouse and do their thing as young kids. You absolutely, because there's development there. Now here's an interesting thing. Go and look at this. There's a gentleman by the name of Jaak Panksepp. He did an experiment with baby rats, where he deprived baby rats of rough and tumble play, because not only wolves and lion cubs and so on and so forth, but even rats. If you look at the children, so the little baby rats, he prevented them from receiving rough and tumble play, right? And then analyzed the effect it had on these little rats. And what they found is that the prefrontal cortex didn't develop properly, and they developed hyperactivity disorders, which then could be treated by the use of Ritalin. Does that ring a bell? Does that turn on a few light bulbs? ADD and stuff like that. I'm actually going to do a video dedicated to ADD. So this is the agreeableness trait now. And it's one of the reasons why girls do so well at school, right? So if you look at this at the education system, whether it's secondary, whether it's tertiary in the university, women are just they're just doing so well, it's unbelievable. And one of the reasons for that is that structured environment where you do as you're told. You're there to please the teacher, to do the right thing, to cooperate, to do your homework, do your assignment, all these kinds of things. People who are high in agreeableness, they flourish, they do well specifically people who are high in agreeableness and high in conscientiousness, which is what you typically find among women. High conscientiousness, high agreeableness, perfect for academics, absolutely perfect for academics. And you find that women are doing so well in education, it's unbelievable. But men, they're literally, young men are dropping out of the education system like flies in the universities and things like that. They're not doing well at all. And the reason for that is because the education system that we've got caters specifically for people who are high in conscientiousness and high in agreeableness. And the part of the population that is and the rest of the population, they just don't do well at all. And so obviously young men who are high in agreeableness and high in conscientiousness, they also do very, very, very well, very, very well. But typically on average, so for example, even young women, if you find a young woman who's low in agreeableness and low in conscientiousness, she'll suffer just as much as young boys do, and will end up dropping out and being dysfunctional, because then they feel that there's no place for them in society, and that's rough. That's really, really rough. And we're finding, and there's a reason why there's so much dysfunction in our youth, and why so many people have been complaining about the way the education system is actually run these days. And they actually have it's actually true. The education system it really caters to only a few types of people, and the rest of them slip through the cracks and end up really, really struggling through life in that way. So that is yeah, that's tough, man. So agreeableness, that desire to cooperate, teacher said so I'm going to make teacher happy, and that's it. And if you're disagreeable, here's another interesting thing. If you're disagreeable, you will disagreeable people They will not do anything unless they can see that there's a legitimate reason for it to be done, unless they can discern a legitimate. So especially for those of you who are educators, and even if you are a parent who is actively engaged with your children doing their homework, whatever, one thing you always hear, and this is a typical phrase from the mouth of a person who's disagreeable. They'll be like, why do I have to learn this rubbish? I'm never going to use it in life, right? It's like, man, I used to say this as a kid, and now I know why. It's disagreeable people have to be bribed in order to get them to do something. They're not automatically willing to comply, right? If you don't give them a legitimately good reason or incentive to do something, they won't do it. It's not going to happen. And that's the nature of a disagreeable person, which is then, interestingly enough, which is why disagreeable people thrive in the business world. Yeah, but we'll get to that. So you find that young disagreeable people in school, you have to just do what you're told, no questions asked, right? And it's awful. Things like critical thinking and stuff like that. If you could bring philosophy and critical thinking and things like that into school, you would find these kids would be going there because make your argument, debate, and they would love that. They would really enjoy that, man. Especially if they're high in openness, they would dig that. I can see, bring back woodwork, bring back metalwork, bring back those kinds of things, because they can see why this is useful, right? And so if you've got a kid that's disagreeable, one of the best things probably the single best thing you can do for them in their education is help them to understand why what they're being taught is useful, why it's legitimate, why they will need it later on. Because if you can't help them see that, they just won't learn it. They're gonna struggle unbelievably. I can't even tell you. And this is from someone who is not only disagreeable and low in conscientiousness, but who's also got ADD and things like that. I mean, you struggle. You really, really struggle. Here's the interesting thing. Just because they're struggling in school doesn't mean they're stupid or ignorant or have a low IQ. So, for example, I did average in school. I wasn't, I didn't stand out. I never received any awards and stuff like that. And I was always convinced that I was a fairly average, simple individual. And actually, in a lot of ways, I know my mother worried about me. Why isn't he doing so well in these kinds of things? Because as far as she could tell, that I was a smart kid, but my grades weren't my grades and my performance in certain things was not matching up. And so I eventually got tested, and she's like, well, he actually has a really, really high IQ, but the school systems just don't utilize that. So high openness. So if you have high openness, low agreeableness, high IQ, your grades won't reflect your grades will not reflect in general won't reflect your true capacity, because schools just aren't geared that way. That means you're a creative person, and if you're highly creative, people don't know what to do with you. But that's for another lecture. Right, so effect in work. Now here's where you then get a flip side. Effect in work. If you are highly, highly agreeable, you're gonna struggle in a highly competitive business world. This doesn't mean there's no place for you. So, for example, if you're high in agreeableness, and this is something that you need to take very, very seriously. I encourage every single person, go out and take a personality test. In fact, do 4 or 5 of them, right? Then add the scores up, and then divide it by the amount of tests you do to get the average, and that'll be the most accurate sort of representation of what you can do. And even get your friends and family who know what you're like to do it with you, because once you know what your personality traits are like, you will know how to orient yourself in life, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you constantly have to battle against your nature in order to do well. It's going to make your life miserable, right? It totally make your life miserable. So if you want to have a career and you're very, very high in agreeableness, you will be very, very useful in any kind of situation that requires that you cooperate with others, right? And in which you have concern for others and want to help other people. So, for example, if you want to, and again, this is one of those interesting things, customer service, for example. If you're agreeable, customer service, you want to help people get the best out of whatever situation they have. You like to solve problems on other people's behalf. You like to advocate for other people. Social work, psychology, medicine, right? Wherever you're dealing with people and trying to improve their quality of life and really be for them, counselors and things of that sort. Very, very good if you're high in agreeableness. That's where you want to be, man. And situations in where you require relying on others and where there's a close bond and with your coworkers and things like that. That is where you will thrive. Where will you not do well? So if you are disagreeable, those things, don't do it. If you have to cooperate with other people, it's probably not a good idea, because you're gonna annoy people. And here's the interesting thing: if you're agreeable, chances are you don't really want to be a manager, because if you're a manager, you often have to make tough decisions that is going to make people dislike you. And if you're agreeable, having other people dislike you is awful. It's terrible, and you're not going to do well in that kind of environment where you have to regularly kick people's butts in order to get them to move. And so, which is why you generally find that mean people tend to be managers and tend to be in positions of authority, because they don't mind whipping the workforce into shape. They don't care if you like them. It's like, do your job or get out. So that's why in the work environment, if you're agreeable, being a manager, you might think that, oh wow, having the position of power is very nice, but you actually wouldn't do really well. You wouldn't like it at all, because it means you've got to be mean, and if you're in a position that can hire and fire, you're not going to enjoy hiring people and then having to fire them later if they don't perform and stuff like that. You're going to really struggle. And you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel guilty as heck if you've got to fire people, even if they're totally useless. You're going to be like, oh, but they're children, and and stuff like that. It's like, you don't want to put yourself in that position, man, at all. And this is one of the reasons why, generally speaking, women don't go for those kinds of high power positions, which require that you have a very, very high stress load. People don't like you very much, highly competitive, where you're in it to win it, and to hell with everyone else. It's you're in there to win. I'm going to win, and forget about everything else. And that's then where very disagreeable people, they will thrive. The cutthroat world of business, where you go and get it, man. It's you work, and you chase that bacon, man. You chase that bacon, and you kill that bacon, and you bring it home and you fry it up, kind of thing. Whereas if you're highly agreeable, you're going to make friends with the bacon, and you're not going to bring it home. You're going to leave it, it's not great. So if you, your CEOs and stuff like that, where you've got to be a real mean son of a gun sometimes in order to get your way. You're going to struggle. So if you're too agreeable, but if you're disagreeable, that's the way to go for you, man. Absolutely, where the cutthroat business world, that's for you. And here's the interesting thing, a lot of people these days, they want to deny the fact that there are biological differences between men and women. They say it's socially constructed rubbish. As I quoted, I think in the last one, they've discovered that in the most egalitarian societies, that means societies that are the most fair and allow the most equal opportunity for everyone, they find that the differences between men and women maximize. They don't minimize, they actually maximize. So women become even more womanly, and men become even more manly. So if that's even a word. So basically what they're finding is, in the West, you have feminists, they're all up in arms because, there aren't more women in STEM fields, right? But in the more egalitarian the country is, the less likely you are to have women in the in STEM fields, and the more likely the women are, once they're given freedom of even greater freedom of choice, they tend on average to gravitate more towards the humanities and medicine and things like that. They become doctors, they become psychologists, they go into the various different medical fields, pediatrics and things of that sort, social workers and stuff like that, administrators, because women also tend to be more organized than men, so administrative jobs, women are better at that sort of thing. So it's one of those clear and absolute irrefutable proofs that society in the West, society responds to the biology rather than society dictating to the biology, right? And that's how you have a fair society. It's that you end up where you want to be, because where you want to be happens to be somewhat mitigated by the biology. So if you're agreeable, you will gravitate to jobs in which agreeableness will achieve the most success, and that's why you find that egalitarian, women become nurses, men become engineers, like it's always been, right? And so there's no patriarchy, there's no oppression there or anything like that. It's literally people doing what suits them, and that's what you want. That's exactly what you want. You don't want to put an agreeable person in an environment or in a work situation where they have to regularly fight and negotiate and compete all the time. They don't like that. They don't thrive. The stress load is too much for people like that. So you got to be aware of that. Don't put yourself in that situation. You're going to be miserable. And here's the interesting thing, which the psychological sciences have actually figured out, is that women actually become happier the more egalitarian societies are becoming. And they found that no, women are actually more miserable now than they've been before, because one of the reasons for that is that the role of the gender roles have been uprooted. So now women, more often than not, are having to go out and be equal and fend for themselves and wrangle and battle the world the way men have always had to. But because they're agreeable, they don't actually like doing that. They'd rather, which is why, if you ask, why did society and the gender roles end up the way they are expressed in the traditional manner? It's because sometime in the past, men and women looked at each other and they're like, do you mind doing that? No. Okay, well, you do that and you stay here and you do this. Why? Well, because this is what I prefer. It's that simple, right? So if anyone comes to you and says that gender roles are a social construct, that gender roles are irrelevant, that gender roles are patriarchy and oppressive and women have been forced into these positions, just tell them just to get lost. It's utter rubbish. It's biological, and biology is about as irrefutable and fundamental as it can possibly get. So there's no two ways about it. And then this goes further to explain why there's so much fighting between men and women, right? Because if on average women are more agreeable and on average men are more disagreeable, it means that on this level they're going to misunderstand each other a lot, right? So a typical fight between a husband and a wife is, wife comes home, wants to talk about her day, and what is her conversation like, right? Oh, well, Jenny did this and did that, and she got dumped by her boyfriend, and Ryan did this and that, and he went and got drunk, and it's about the people and what the people have done and all that kind of stuff. And the guy's sort of looking at it, is like, why do I care if Jenny's toenail fell off? It's like, this is mundane and boring, and why women then get upset with men, because when she asks the man, well, how was your day? It was like, well, same thing, different day, because men don't perceive the work environment as a place of social. It's to go get the job done, and then the job's done and come home. The social interactions are irrelevant, right? And that's why, sort of thing. So in those conversations, the man is generally, he finds the woman's experience to be mundane and irrelevant, and then the woman tends to find men as cold-hearted and cold-hearted, and how dare you disregard my experience. And that's literally what you get. And so this is where men and women have to, in general, but agreeable, because you get it the other way around as well, because a woman who's disagreeable behaves in the same way that a man who's disagreeable was. Like, I don't care, that's irrelevant, go cry somewhere else, irrelevant. And so this is then where the balance, if you're agreeable or disagreeable, and the balance between men and women, where men need to learn to become more agreeable and women need to learn to become less agreeable. Because if you're a woman and someone asks you, what do you want? You need to learn how to tell them what you want, and not feel guilty about it. Don't feel guilty about saying, well, this is what I want and that's what I'm going to get. End of story. And why do I get to have it? Because I want it. It's you have a right to want what you want. And negotiate that, and it's the same thing. And then on the other hand, the same thing for men. Learn how to become more gentle. It's not always right to just railroad people all the time, and to disregard how other people feel about things. And so this is where we need to meet in the middle. So and this is the thing, you can pathologize the two things. So you can be agreeable to the point of pathology, and you can be disagreeable to the point of pathology. So if you are disagreeable to the point of pathology, you're like one of those sociopaths who feel absolutely nothing, and all they do is just go from one person to the next, manipulating them, and they can kill someone and they don't care about it. So and you need to be careful of those people. But then at the same time, you can get people who are so agreeable that it's impossible for them to be objective about anything, right? And this is again one of the battles between men and women, where the men typically say, well, facts don't care about your feelings, and then typically women are like, well, I don't care about the facts, my experience is what matters the most, my feelings are what matters the most. And the thing is, depending on the situation, both are right and both are wrong. It's like there's a time for cold, hard, brute facts and cold, hard, brute reality, and sometimes you require the emotions and what the experience of the world has to say to you, right? And both together gives you the full picture of real life experience. So both ways are legitimate ways of being, right? The problem is that men want to insist that their way is the only way, and women want to insist that their way is the only way, and that's wrong. Both are legitimate, and both have to learn from each other. And here's one of the interesting things as well. If you look in a society in which men behave the best will be the society in which men are married, right? Because men not being naturally agreeable, we don't have biological brakes on our aggression, on our competitiveness, on all of these things. And in a way it's good, because it allows us to go and be the hunter, and you understand what I mean, to go and get, because that's always been our role in society, is to go and get, and don't be afraid, just go and subdue. And that's what the Bible says. He says to Adam, go into the world and have dominion and subdue it. Go make it into something, right? And that's what men do typically. And being disagreeable allows us that emotional resilience in order to be able to do that we can get slapped around, and we can get beaten up, and we can get completely thrashed to pieces, and we like, right, I'm gonna grab this bull by the horns, and I'm gonna keep going even if I get obliterated. And that helps us do that. But it can get to the point where if you're dealing then, but the reason why you're doing that is because you have a family, is because you have something to come back to, right? And again, there's that incentive, right? If you're disagreeable, you need an incentive to do something, otherwise you won't do it. And you will find that men will tend to become criminal if they have no incentive to be decent. And that's where women come in. and woman and marriage and children and having a family. It's the only thing that there exists in order to incentivize a man to behave decently, really, is if he has something he cares about, right? That gives him a reason to be decent, that gives him a reason to rein in the aggression and rein in the competitiveness and all that sort of thing. Is if he has, and I found that in my experience, that the single best thing that I could have ever done was get married. And I'm not trying to be romantic and mushy and all that kind of rubbish, okay? Just, I'm disagreeable. It's not what I'm like, okay? Right? But the single best thing that I could have ever done was get married, because let me tell you, yeah, men, marriage keeps you in line, and you need that. You're right. You need that. Obviously, don't go find some psycho woman who's just gonna, obviously within reason, right? Women can be as pathological as men can be, all right? So go and find yourself a good woman that's going to keep you on the straight and narrow, and it'll be the best thing you could ever do, man. Absolutely, the absolute best thing. And work with her, and that's what I've personally experienced. My wife is very, very agreeable, and I was very disagreeable, and we both helped pull each other into the center, and it's been a miracle, really, how we've managed to change and become better people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this personality stuff. It's like men and women need to learn how to communicate with each other again. We need to stop this. We need to stop this battle of the sexist stupidity. We need to start forgiving and forgetting. It doesn't, right? Who offended who oppressed who? All right, okay, fair enough. Like, now put that stuff in the past. It's like, how are we going to live tomorrow? Are we gonna work together or not? Right? And for the men, there's an incentive. Right? If you're agreeable, there's your incentive to cooperate. You want to make the world a better place. Otherwise nothing but chaos, man. And your life is gonna be meaningless. Because one thing that young men don't realize is that the fight, you're not in the fight for the sake of the fight. You're in the fight for the sake of something else. And if you don't have something else, if all you do is fight, then the fight itself has to be given meaning. And that is one of the reasons why, and we really, really need to pay attention to this. Men are committing suicide at a rate previously unknown. Especially men in the West are committing suicide. I think of all, if you take the total suicides, I think it's something like 70% or 70 to 80% of all suicides are men. Right? And that's because if we don't have a reason to keep going, if we're not given a reason to keep going, well, then we have no reason to be alive. So, dear men, those disagreeable son of a guns out there, you need a reason to live. Go find yourself a good woman. A good woman. And she'll give you one. But a good woman, right? Don't just go for any troll out there, because and ladies, same thing with men, right? Don't just go for any moron out there just because you've got an itch, right? Don't do that, right? But men, find yourself a good woman, and she'll help you. She'll sort you out. She'll give you a reason to. She'll give you a reason to. She'll give the fight meaning. Do not for a second believe that the fight is meaning unto itself. It's not. And you can find that. So, for example, one thing that in the business world, the strongest predictors of success in the business world is disagreeableness, is low agreeableness, high conscientiousness. Okay? And that is more often found in men, which is why Fortune 500 companies, FTSE 100 companies, they're run almost exclusively by men, right? And feminism has taught women to be envious of this. Why aren't there more women in those positions? Well, let me tell you why there aren't any women in those positions. It's because you have to be insane to even want that job, let alone to actually go through with it, right? Because that low agreeableness and high conscientiousness, it's like all you know how to do is just fight and fight and fight, and that's what those jobs require. These men in those high-powered positions, we have this distorted view that being in charge, that being the CEO of a multi-million, billion-dollar company, that it's you sitting in an office with your feet up smoking cigars. That's wrong. That's wrong. To be a CEO of these companies, all you ever do is work. That is all you ever do is work. And you can go and you can talk to these people in those high-powered positions. They're all divorced. Their children barely know them, or their children hate them, right? Just trail of dysfunctional families behind them. Trail of divorces. They're on their second, third, fourth divorce. Their personal lives are a train wreck because they have no time to invest in their personal life, because they don't have that capacity. All they know how to do is to work. All they know is the fight, right? To go and get the money and get the power and get the fame and get the recognition. And the reason why you don't find so many women in those positions is not because patriarchy. It's not because of some stupid imaginary glass ceiling. It's because women are high in agreeableness. They know better than to go. They choose to prioritize family and friends and community over a 70, 80, 90-hour work week. It's why law firms in general are struggling to retain their women, their female lawyers, past a certain age, because those high-powered women are getting to a certain age where they're realizing, this is not worth it. I actually want a life. I actually want friends. I actually want children. I actually want meaning in my life, because those women are getting to those positions and they're realizing what the men are failing to realize. And that's the fight in and of itself has no meaning if you're not fighting for something. And so the ideal life is one where your work life, the daily grind out there, the fight, so to speak, if that doesn't serve your private life, your family, your friends, your spouse, your community, if that doesn't serve that, you're going to have no meaning in life. None whatsoever, and you're going to become dysfunctional and pathological. And that's why feminism has done nothing but ruin femininity, because it's not saying celebrate femininity. It's actually saying celebrate masculinity by getting women to go and behave like men. Feminism is in fact the direct opposite of celebrating femininity. Feminism actually spits on femininity. Interestingly enough, if you go and see, think about it, right? You would have never imagined that it would be women that would champion killing unborn children. Never in a million years would you have ever thought that the very ones who are known for their compassion, their love, their care, their sensitivity, that it would be that the most compassionate, most loving group would be the very one that would go and riot in the streets and champion in the streets for the right to kill unborn children. And this is where agreeableness can be abused, because Why are the women doing that? Because if someone who's high in agreeableness, if you convince someone who is high in agreeableness, if you convince them that someone is being oppressed, they will do anything on behalf of the person that they believe is being oppressed. And the higher in agreeableness they are, the less they are interested in the facts, and the more they are interested in that person's experience, and it's like they let their compassion run away with them. And that's why activism, political activism, is getting away with what it is getting away with, because the vast majority of people who are involved in political activism are women. Even Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 women. You've got feminism and all these things. The vast majority of the people who are involved in activism are women and men who are very, very high in agreeableness. Very, very high in agreeableness, low in conscientiousness. Because they believe that they're doing the right thing, right? And this is the horrific part of it. They believe they're doing the right thing. They believe they are championing for someone who is oppressed. So they actually mean well. But the people at the top are disagreeable, and they are manipulating the people at the bottom by feeding them lies and preying upon their compassion, to the point where even compassionate people can be manipulated to go out and destroy society if they believe that society, whether it's true or not, is irrelevant. If you can convince them that the society is oppressing the underdog, then you can get even agreeable people who are supposed to be compassionate. You can even get those people to go out and destroy that society. It's like, for example, it's like a mother bear, right? Go and try and mess with her baby cub and see what she'll do to you, right? And this is the thing. Being compassionate doesn't preclude you from being violent, because you can be violent because you're compassionate, because you care so much about something, you are willing to be violent in order to protect what you believe is vulnerable. And so that's why the balance is required between disagreeableness, because disagreeableness can be violent, but also compassion, too much compassion, if allowed to run away with you, it can also cause you to be violent if it's misdirected. And so that's very, very interesting. That's a very, very important thing to remember, and we're seeing that everywhere in society today. So yeah, that's how it'll affect you in work. That's how it'll affect you in the wider in work, in the wider world, and in your relationships. How does it affect you in your relationships? So it's the same thing, because it all translates across. If you are high in agreeableness, you need to be very, very careful that you don't marry someone who is manipulative, because if you're highly agreeable, you're easily manipulated. They're going to play with your emotions. This is the reason why the phrase, "if you love me, you'll have sex with me," tends to work, right? How many of you women have heard this? Well, if you love me, you'll sleep with me, right? Because those men who are pathological and low in conscientiousness, like they don't care, and they're highly disagreeable, they're only after one thing. They know that by playing with your emotions, they will get you to do what they want you to do, which then ties back in what I just said about the activism, right? If you love these people, then you will go and you will kill those people. And so people go out in the activism, and they go and they riot in the streets, and they go and they want to demolish systems, because they've been convinced that by demolishing the system, you are helping out the poor, you are helping out the oppressed, you are helping out the suffering, when that might not necessarily be the case. And it's the same thing with a man who comes to a woman and says, "if you love me, you'll sleep with me," and she'll be like, "well, I love him, I really want to show him that I love him," and so on. All right, I'll sleep with him. And her compassion and her emotions actually get her to behave in a way which is detrimental to herself, where she can go and do something that she believes is right, but ends up hurting her. And so even though it's sort of a 60-40% disparity between men and women, even that small difference in agreeableness between men and women is enough to cause, even that slight difference is enough to cause a massive impact on society and in relationships even. But you see this as well. So again, it's not about being sexist, right? Because a man who is very, very agreeable will also be manipulated by a woman who is disagreeable. And you see it, man. You see it. I've seen men who are not allowed to leave their house without signing a permission slip from their wives in triplicate. Where are you going? What time are you going to be there? How long are you going to be there? You will return before X, Y, and Z time. You get men like that who are very, very agreeable. And the thing is, this is how you know that the problems in society, they run deeper than merely stupid appeals to things like patriarchy and whatever the case. These are much deeper, much more subtle problems, because, and that's how you know that it's not about gender, it's not about gender discrimination and all that sort of thing, because men who are high in agreeableness, they suffer in the exact same way that women who are high in agreeableness suffer in society as well, right? And so so a bit of advice, if you are high in agreeableness, one of the best things you can do is take assertiveness training, learn how to be more assertive, to know what you want, to figure out what you want. Take the time and don't feel guilty, because that can happen. Don't feel guilty to know what it is that you want and fight for what you want, and to hold back and think, is this really, really the right thing? So that's agreeableness. It can be a wonderful thing. It can be a wonderful thing, absolutely wonderful thing. There's nothing more wonderful. And here's the thing: on average, people who are high in agreeableness, you will be liked by people. It's just one of those things. It's a proven fact that people like people who are high in agreeableness. And yeah, those are the best people to be friends with. It's like, if you're going to choose someone to be friends with or someone to be married to, you want someone who's high in agreeableness. They're wonderful, because they're going to actually care about you. Here's a subtle difference, right? Where the difference between an extrovert and someone who's high in agreeableness. A person who's extrovert likes to be around people, but doesn't necessarily mean they like those people, all right? Whereas agreeableness, that is the personality trait where you actually like the people that you are around, okay? So be very, very careful. Extrovert likes to be around people, but doesn't necessarily give a damn about those people. They just like the social interaction. Whereas agreeable people, they actually care. So someone who's high agreeableness, low extroversion, so they don't really like situations, but just because they're low in extrovert doesn't mean that they still don't care deeply about other people. And there's nothing more wonderful, man, than someone who's really, really agreeable. And I'm saying this from a position of someone who's married to an agreeable person. Man, I can't even tell you how fantastic it is. Agreeableness it's great. Compassion. I mean, who doesn't like compassion and altruism? And these are things that we're constantly championing in the world. Compassion and altruism and modesty and things of that sort. It's absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, it does leave you vulnerable to. It makes you vulnerable to people who want to manipulate you, to people who want to take advantage of you, and things like that. And it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you're high in agreeableness, you're going to be vulnerable to people that try to manipulate you. It's what con artists, so confidence men, con artists, that's what they're looking for in people that they're going to take advantage of. They're looking for people who are high in agreeableness, because those people are the easiest people to manipulate, because you can get them to feel sorry for you. They're more willing to trust you, right? So they're less inclined to be critical of you. They're more willing to believe the best of you. And here's the interesting thing, right? the biblical story affirms all of this, right? So, for example, when you look in the Garden of Eden, right, the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, they were in the garden, right? God warns them, don't eat from that tree. And he also warns them, Satan is around and he's going to try and deceive you, right? So stay away from that tree, because that is the only place that I've allowed him to, in order to do this. And some people can ask, and people have asked, why did Satan go after Eve first and not Adam? That's why. It's because of the two, she was the most agreeable and the most willing to believe and to trust him. And one of the ways, and if you look at the speech of the snake, he tried to convince her that God was actually oppressive. He tried to convince her that the only reason why God was withholding the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good of evil, he convinced her that God was withholding something good for her, that was good for her, that was of benefit for her, that God was actually being dishonest, and that God was actually being oppressive, and that if she did this, that she was going to free herself and free her husband and enter into a higher plane of existence, of knowledge and all that kind of stuff. That's how he convinced her to do what she did. And it's the exact same tactic today that activist groups are doing. They're convincing people, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. They're convincing people that this one is oppressed and that one's oppressed and that one is vulnerable and we need to go and protect them. And what do? We lobby the government to get involved. And the government only ever makes things worse. The government never makes things better, ever. Not in the record, and even the Bible says so. Right? When Israel said, we want a king, and God said, I will let you have a king, but I'm warning you, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well for you. The kings and queens of the world are going to enslave you, and they're going to rip you off, and they're going to cause untold misery. And that's exactly what happened. And so that's why Satan went after Eve first. And then once Eve ate of the fruit, what's the first thing she did? Wow, I've received. She felt like she had received this wonderful benefit. And what was the first thing in her agreeable nature, in that nurturing nature? I'm now going to go give some to my husband. The first thing she did, and that's why the Bible says as well, once they fell, God says to Eve, your desire will be for your husband. It's not like he's cursing them and making something happen. He's just telling them what's going to happen now that you've fallen. What are going to be the consequences? And he says to Eve, your desire will be for your husband. And that's what Eve did. First thing she did, went to her husband. Look, this was fantastic. It's delicious. It's, Satan manipulated her imagination and manipulated her agreeableness so that she could imagine all the wonderful benefits. And then once she ate it, she imagined that, all these wonderful things were happening. Let me go and share it with my husband. And took it to Adam. And Adam wasn't deceived, because of the two, who would be the most disagreeable trait? The male. The male would be critical, and that's on average, men are more critical, right? Who's more likely to criticize another person? A man. Look at that idiot, right? We're talking rubbish. Skepticism and stuff like that, right? Men like to fight and argue and debate and be skeptical about things and criticize each other and really have a go at each other. So that's what Adam would have been like. He would have been more disagreeable. And the Bible says Adam was not deceived. Adam was not deceived. But he cared about Eve. Eve gave meaning to his life. So he ate the fruit because he realized, right? And like I said earlier on, what gives the fight that men have to go through? The fight. What gives it meaning? Woman give life meaning to us. It's woman that gives us meaning. And so that's why Adam fell as well. That's why he ate the fruit, because I'm going to fall with her to try and save her. Because he knew that this was wrong. He wasn't deceived. He knew straight away, man, this was the wrong thing to do. So he ate the fruit to try and save Eve. because she's the one that gave, and he couldn't imagine his life without her. So I'm going to fall with her, and I'm going to get into the fight with her, and that's where we've been since the fall. And then the corruption set in, because when God came to Adam, he says, Adam, why'd you do that? And he did what men have always done. He didn't take responsibility and say, what should he have said? God, it's my fault. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I did the wrong thing anyway, rather than trust you. What did he do? He blamed his wife. Because of the woman that you gave me, I ate and I fell. Rather than take responsibility for what he did. And not only take responsibility for himself, but take responsibility for her. So then God went to Eve and said, well, why did you do it? And she didn't take responsibility either. She blamed the serpent. Oh, it's not my fault. He manipulated me. Do you hear that from feminists today? Oh, it's the men's fault. It's one thing that you find, especially in feminism and stuff like that, when a woman behaves in a certain way, what does she always blame? Her biology. I was PMSy, I was this and I was that. It's like, heaven help you if you ever tell a woman that she's behaving in a certain way because of her hormones. But in order to excuse what they've done, that's the first thing that even they themselves always blame. I mean, I've been in a situation growing up as a kid where I was assaulted by a woman, and they blamed their biology, they blamed their PMS, they blamed their menopause. They never take responsibility. And you see that as well today. It's like, oh well, this man manipulated me, and it's like, surely you have a mind of your own. And that's how the agreeableness and the disagreeableness, the difference between the men and women play, is how do we fix the problem? By taking responsibility. Men, take responsibility for yourselves, for your disagreeableness, and learn how to manage it, and solicit the woman's help to help you manage your disagreeableness, to help mitigate it. And women, do the same thing with men, right? Take responsibility. You can't blame everything on your hormones, and men as well. You can't blame it on because it's hormonal as well, right? A lot of people, because women often ask, well, why don't men cry? And one of the answers is because men are taught not to cry. That's rubbish. That's rubbish. The circuitry in the human brain that regulates crying and regulates that emotion for crying is inhibited by testosterone. So so in the same way that agreeableness inhibits the aggression circuitry in women, testosterone inhibits the crying circuitry in men. So we are physically inhibited from crying, so that the only time we cry is when the issue is so overwhelming that it can push through that the testosterone inhibition. So it's got to be strong enough to push that, and then we eventually cry, which is why we cry less. It's not because society has told us that we shouldn't or should not cry. That's not why. It's we are biologically less capable of doing so than what women are, and vice versa. And it's the same with aggression. Women are biologically less capable of aggression than men are, because women have agreeableness that gets in the way of the aggression response. And so that's why we have our strengths, and each one has our strengths and our weaknesses, and we have to both of us come to the middle. Agreeable people and disagreeable people come to the middle and learn how to negotiate and learn how to get along. And I know that I've spoken a lot about men and women, and that's only because it tends to be divided up in that way the most. It's the men and women we are the archetypes, so to speak, maleness and femaleness. It's the archetypal representation of these traits, even though you find a balance and a variety of it between the two, so you get disagreeable women and you get agreeable men. but on average, each one represents the most. So it's the ease. So when I appeal to men and women, it's not because they don't both share the traits, but for the sake of expression and for the sake of language, it's just a lot easier to express it in those terms. And because as human beings, we go out and we live in the world and we experience these things for ourselves. It's relatable, And we've all asked these questions, whether it's politically correct or not. In the depths of our minds, we do sit there and ask ourselves, why are we so different? Why are men from Mars and women from Venus? And we're desperate to understand each other. And this is one of the ways, and which is why I'm doing these videos. This is one of the ways which human beings who are different can come together and understand why the other one is the way they are. And we need to start realizing and appreciating the fact that we have biological traits that make us either capable or incapable of doing things. And instead of condemning each other, we have to rather try and help each other and give each other and try encourage each other and incentivize each other to be better. To be better. It's like men are made better by women and women are made better by men. Because we make each other better. And that's what the Institute of Marriage was for. Again, in the Bible, go to Genesis. God looks at Adam before he had created Eve and he says, it is not good for man to be alone. And that's true, man. That's true. It's not good for man to be alone. Because if man is alone, he has no reason for existence. Honestly, we have these days in response to the feminist, in response to much of the feminist insanity that you get out in the world, you have a response group now starting. It's been around for a while, actually. It's known as Meninism. So you've got feminism and you've got Meninism, but then you've got another group called MGTOW. It's men going their own way. It's a mistake, and it's not like I don't understand why women and men do that. We've hurt each other. We've hurt each other. Honestly, we have in the most bloody awful ways. Really, we're so stupid and we mistreat each other so much. So it's not like I don't understand why they're doing these things. But it's in the wrong direction. It's in the opposite direction of each other. And the right way is towards each other. Come back together. Stop being so insane and come back to the middle and learn how to negotiate and learn how to appreciate the other one for what they are. Because the things that I hear out of the feminist camp, the man hating, the misandry, it's unbelievable. And then the misogyny that I'm hearing from the male side, it's equally as appalling. And they're both manifesting the worst of each other and in themselves. So yeah, that's agreeableness. It's one of the biggest sources of conflict between men and women is this agreeableness, disagreeableness. And you will succeed, and as an individual, regardless of whether you are a man or a woman, it's good to know where you are in the agreeableness and the disagreeableness, because if you are very disagreeable, you need to realize that you can be too harsh, you can be too objective, you can be too cold, hyper-rational. But if you're agreeable, and even though that hyper-rational and things like that can be very, very good out in the business world, out in situations where you have to compete and negotiate and be successful in that way, it's very, very good. But in terms of relationships, you're gonna struggle. You're gonna railroad your partners, and you're gonna railroad your children as well, right? And anyone that's ever been, go and speak to any child that's ever been raised by a military father, and they'll tell you, it's like, man, he's just it's unbelievable, to the point where you crush the child's spirit. And then in the agreeableness side, right, you can also, it's fantastic. You cooperate and you make friends. You make friends easily, and you're compassionate, and you know exactly what other people are feeling, and you know who needs a hug, and you're the beating heart of society. You're the soul of society. But then at the same time, you're vulnerable to being manipulated, and also you can get to the point where you can mollycoddle people, to the point where that is unhealthy as well. Because if you mollycoddle someone, you don't allow them to develop. That people need to struggle in order to develop. It's why puppies play fight, and they pull and push on each other, to learn where are the boundaries, and it develops the brain as well. Like, remember that experiment that I told you about the baby rats? If they didn't have the rough and tumble play, if they didn't get knocked around a little bit, their brains didn't develop properly, and they developed psychological disorders as a result that could only then be treated by hard medication. Right? You can mother too much, to the point where whatever you're mothering becomes useless and dependent on you, which is why nowadays, because of all the activism that has been run primarily by people high in agreeableness, and primarily by women, you now have what's called a welfare state. And the welfare state is it's not creating independent people, it's creating dependent people. It's creating people who, instead of being self-sufficient, they just become dependent on the state for handouts, and they never learn to grow and have their own esteem and have their own dignity, But then at the same time, you can be cold and dismiss people that genuinely need help. So it's about negotiating and meeting in the middle. So that's agreeableness for you. It's quite a thing. It's quite a thing. It woke me up. Because I was one of those people. I used to think that agreeableness was weakness. It's not. Agreeableness may make you vulnerable, but being vulnerable and being weak are two different things. It's not the same thing. Being vulnerable and being weak is not the same thing. And so, men, you need to learn the difference. I'm looking at you, men, testosterone-laden, disagreeable people, you, right? Being vulnerable does not mean being weak. It's not the same thing. And this is something that women have for generations been trying to teach us, and we just haven't got the picture. Vulnerability and weakness is not the same thing. And men, if you could learn how to be vulnerable with your wives, you open up a whole new world of experience and possibility, and she will love you for it. Give it a go. And the same thing goes for women. Those women of you, the small percentage of you that are very, very disagreeable, don't make the same mistake that us men make, right? Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is not weakness. And vulnerability is necessary if you want to be able to establish meaningful relationships with other people. It's necessary. So I think I'm going to leave that there, because, man, this is a massive subject. You can go on. Each trait is so profound. It's so profound, and how it is in our bodies, and how it's amazing. So I'm going to leave that there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. I hope this helps you improve, helps you direct yourself for the best kind of job, so you can have job satisfaction, so that you can stop being jealous of those other people who have what appears to be the grass is greener the grass is not always greener on the other side. Forget about the other people. Go and put yourself in a position where you can be successful, and where you can reach, and where who you are can be, you can fully express it, and to the greatest reward. Forget about what other people are doing, right? There's a statistic. After earning more than X amount of money, does not bring you more happiness. Once you've earned enough money to pay your bills, to buy your food, to have your car, to get around, not even a sports car, whatever, to get around and afford a couple of little niceties. More money doesn't bring happiness. It actually brings more misery, because it means you have to work all the time, and you sacrifice your life in order to work. So stop being envious of those people, these Fortune 500 people, these guys driving around in Ferraris and stuff like that. Stop being jealous of them. It's not worth it. You don't want that life. Really, really, you don't want that life. That's not the way to go. That's not the way to go. No one goes to their deathbed wishing they had another Ferrari. Go speak to old people and ask them, now that you are at the end of your life, what is it that counts? What is it that really counts? Forget about what society is telling you. Forget about what the music videos are telling you. Forget about what the activists are telling you, that you have to have the high-powered job, otherwise you're going to be miserable. No, you will be miserable if you have the high-powered job. Go talk to those people. They're not happy. Insofar as they will be happy because they can fully express the full extent of their personality traits, that which is disagreeableness and conscientiousness, and they can run like rats on the wheel, and so it serves their personality trait. But ask them what their personal lives are, and they'll tell you, I've got divorces left, right, and center. My kids are estranged. Anyway. I've been here before. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. God bless, and I hope this helped you. Cheerio.